Hello, my name is Henry. I am an AI presenter for Hexhamtv. As part of its commitment to support local producers, Hexhamtv has created Shop Northumberland, a brand that supports and showcases Northumberland-based artists, creatives and producers. In this online event, Hexhamtv speaks to Northumberland-based artists about their inspiration and practice. You then have the opportunity to buy some pieces of their work by scanning a QR code to make a secure payment. In this way, Hexhamtv seeks to open new markets to rural artists and to introduce creators to a new audience. This project is supported by Creative UK, the Rural Design Innovation Project, Rural Creative Challenge, and the North of Tyne Combined Authority. Now meet the artists showcased in this session.
I'm Susan Dobson, and I am an artist, printmaker, and my studio's in this lovely rural setting up above Hexham.
Susan, tell me a little bit about how you came to become an artist.
Right, well, since childhood really. I remember when I was 14, I was really besotted by Cézanne, and I chose my bedroom wallpaper because it reminded me of one of his pictures, and it just went on from there really. When I went to college, I did art as a main subject, and then I did a degree in the history of art through the Open University. That was while I was teaching. I taught in high schools in Newcastle for about 15 years, in high schools teaching up to A level. I also ran general studies courses for sixth form, and then I was able to take early retirement, and shortly afterwards I was able to move into this studio, and that was 2003, and I've been here ever since. So that's basically me.
And what are your main subjects for your art?
Right, well, my main love is mountains. I always went into the countryside when I was younger. When I moved up here, obviously the Lake District, I moved up here in 1966, never left again. And the Lake District's on the doorstep. Northumberland I love as a landscape, but it's not a landscape that I respond to in a creative way. It's the mountains that actually inspire me. So then trips to the Lake District, west coast of Scotland, the Highlands, and then when the kids were bigger and I started going to the Alps and Dolomites with my husband, and it went on from there. But then really before we got going to the going very regularly to the mountains, we went to a talk at Kendal Mountain Festival about, it was given by Doug Scott, a famous mountaineer, and he was talking about his summit of Kanchenjunga in 1975 without oxygen, and I just said, I think I need to see these mountains. So in 2006 I had my first trip to go and see Kanchenjunga in Sikkim, in northern India, and I wanted to draw, obviously, because that's what I do when I'm in the mountains. So we organised it so that I could stop and draw when I wanted to. And then really got the bug for the Himalayas. So I've had 5 trips altogether to the Himalaya over the years. They were all really concentrated into a period of from 2006 to 2012, and then after that various things like I would have liked to go to the the north side of Everest, to Tibet, but the Brits weren't welcome at the point where we could have done it. And then there was that awful earthquake in Nepal that limited access, and then you get older and it gets less less feasible, but something that's never going to leave me. So now we go to the Alps and Dolomites every year, sometimes twice a year if we go in the winter, which is always the closest I can get to the Himalaya, with the snow and the blue sky and the ice. And all my work really develops from the experience in the mountains until lockdown. And then luckily we'd had a really good trip out to the Outer Hebrides and Cape Wrath, and I'd done some watercolours while we were there. And with lockdown, I began to do some work inspired by that. And that's been the last 2 or 3 years I've developed that work.
So there are various aspects to your work, Susan, aren't there?
Yeah.
Perhaps you can talk about some of them now.
Right. Well, I could talk to you about how an etching gets onto an etching plate. I don't know if you can see that. Maybe I can hold it so you can see the textures on there. Can you see the detail?
Yes.
There? Right, so that developed from this watercolour that I made looking at, this is Blencathra, looking at it from the south side, obviously, where you see all the ridges going along, and Sharp Edge coming down there. So to get this image onto a plate like this is a zinc plate, and it gets etched in nitric acid. And I use zinc because it responds very quickly to the acid, and so it means it doesn't take forever to wait for the acid to bite. So to get that image onto the plate involves reversing the image, which is easy these days with computers. You used to have to trace it out yourself. And then the plate goes between that sheet of paper and a piece of newsprint. The plate is covered with a wax ground, so the whole thing is rolled over with wax, which protects the plate, and then you trace over the image, and if you can see there, the newsprint lifts the wax from the plate, and where the wax is lifted, the acid can get through. So you put that in the acid for, I don't know, maybe 20 seconds to try to make sure you've got the bones of the drawing. and take a print, and that's just a very rough print to show that you've got all the information you need. And then to get the tone of the drawing, you clean off the whole plate and then you make an aquatint process called aquatinting, which is these days is a very fine acrylic spray. It used to be resin, but that's very bad for the health. And you cover the whole plate, and then you gradually block out with varnish, first starting with the lighter bits. So you block out these white areas and then put it in the acid for 6 or 7 seconds, take it out, block out the next tone, so it goes in for another 7 seconds, say, so that bit will have had no contact with the acid. This bit has had 7 seconds. To get to the darkest tones, you probably have to do about 6 or 7 steps, so that altogether it's probably had a minute and a half in the acid. Then you can clean that off and take another print. No, that's not the one, sorry. Oh, you take this print, sorry. This is once you've finished blocking out and going through that process, you take a print to check that you've got the tones where you want them. Now I wanted to have a little bit of texture in the foreground, so I put together on another rejected print some texture using scrim and things like that. Having put another wax ground on, that goes through the press because it needs heavy pressure, and again, like the newsprint, it lifts the wax off so that you can get this texture onto the plate. And then when you take a print of that, you can see that the textures come through onto the plate. And then you decide how you're going to ink it up. This was just a first practice. There's a little bit of purpley brown in that, but I tend to make more coloured etchings. I then work out a colour scheme. I put all the colours on at the same time. Some printmakers make separate plates for each colour, but to me the landscape isn't separate blocks of colour, it works with each other, and so I put the main colours into the areas I want it, and then it's a process of wiping it off until you've got the clear areas clear, and the other areas the sort of tones you want them to be. And that's how you make an etching. Right, so all of my work is based on the drawings that I make in the landscape. And of course the most intense experience I had was time in the Himalayas, because you're basically there walking for a fortnight through a landscape and you have no distractions, and it's just a wonderful experience. And you get to go to places where there's just you and the landscape, and what more can you want, really? But when I went on my first trip to see Kanchenjunga, I needed to have a way of being able to work as we were walking, rather than having to always sit down for, you know, an hour or two. And I also wanted to make notes about the experience, and I made notes before I went about other artists that had gone to the same place. And then I wrote notes about what it was like to be in a situation in Delhi. We started from there, a town, you know, or Calcutta actually we started in, and you just think, you have no idea of how other societies work until you go. It's just mind-blowing. And even now, if there's anything on the radio and you hear, based in any of those countries, and you hear the beep beep of people beeping at each other in the traffic, it takes you back straight away, because it's not like British beeping at people, it's entirely cooperative. So if you beep at someone, they move aside and let you go. And there was even one occasion when we went down to see the Taj Mahal at the end of one of the trips. We were on a dual carriageway, which is quite rare, and I think we might have made 50 miles an hour, I'm not sure. Our Sherpa certainly wasn't comfortable with that level of speed. And all of a sudden the traffic started going onto the opposite carriageway, because there were some elephants on the carriageway we were on. And it's just like everybody does the sensible thing. And because I suppose it's low speed compared with here, it works. But it's a revelation, really. So when we got to Darjeeling, which was the first stop for acclimatisation, the absolute classic view, which lots of artists have drawn, is the view of Kanchenjunga from Observatory Ridge in Delhi. And people who know me will laugh, because I made this drawing at 5:45 in the morning. I'm normally nowhere near consciousness. And then at 7 o'clock, having done that, I made a watercolour to get the sort of feeling of the place. And this is often what I do. I'll do a line drawing first with these are waterproof pens, and then a larger drawing to get more of the feel of the place. So that was my first experience of being in the Himalayas. Then we got to places where the prayer flags and standing stones were in holy places, Lampokri that was called. And then just really recording the mountains as we pass by them, because you proceed up a valley and the mountains all change position, and you begin to see that that actually isn't a solid ridge. It's actually got a space between the foreground and what you see as the one massive shape. And even more so, that happened in the Everest Trail in the Khumbu, which was the next trip we went on, which was amazing. So I made some watercolours from this view, which I sold. So, and one person contacted me after she'd seen something, an article about my work, and she asked me if I'd still got the image that had been in the article, because she'd spent many years going up to Darjeeling with her husband, who was an engineer, and he went up to service and instruct people how to keep the little Darjeeling steam train going. And he died, and it just had taken her back, and she really wanted that image, and she came and bought it. So, and I find a lot of my images have quite emotional significance to people, because mountains do affect you like that. So my other printmaking process is monotype. Monotype is the closest you get to painting, really, in the printmaking lexicon. And it basically involves, for me, rolling up this is a polycarbonate plate, which is the kind of plastic used in greenhouses. Rolling it up with ink in various colours for the image that I'm expecting to make. And again, they're usually based on drawings that I've made. And what happens is that once the plate is inked up, these are all the different colours rolled out to start with. That's a press it will eventually go through. So rolling up the plate is just a rough guide to where I'm going to be drawing, and then I use the end of a paintbrush sharpened to draw in the lines of the image that I'm aiming for, and then I wipe away, following the lines that I've drawn in there, to develop the image. And where you wipe away the ink, obviously you get the light. It's a wonderful technique for mountains, because you get the atmospherics and you get the textures. And this was quite a big piece of work that I was making for an exhibition, and it was the view of Amadablam from way up a valley, a side valley in the Khumbu. And you can see that it isn't a precise art like etching can be. It's very much intuitive and like painting, really. And the beauty of it is that when it goes through the press, when you put it through the press, that pressure actually causes the ink to make textures that you can't really get any other way. So you never quite know what's going to come out the other end, but the more you do it, the more control you develop. And I just call that the alchemy of the press. It's, irreplaceable. So this is, you can see from this that it's completely different to etching, because there's nothing left on the plate. So once you've made it, you've made it. And that's why it's called monotype, because you basically get one image. This is a monotype of the Matterhorn, which is based on a drawing that I made up on the plateau where people go to climb it. And you can see how you can just get the cloud and the light and the textures of the rock just through this way of wiping and drawing into the ink. so that was made on this plate, and so was this one. Now I've just said, so, you know, this same plate made that image. That is what you call a ghost image, because sometimes when you make the first monotype, there's enough ink left on the plate for you to take one more impression, but you can see that it's never the same as the first impression because you've got a lot less ink there. But I really like it when it works because it just conveys that light in high places, whether you're in the Alps or the Dolomites or, you know, I don't know, that was about 4,000 metres, and this is a mountain called Island Peak, which a lot of people go as a climbing trek, and I've sold 2 or 3 versions of that to people who've stood on the summit there. So that's really pleasing because, you know, you've caught some of the atmosphere of the place, even though I stayed firmly on the ground. So that's monotype, and you can see why I would like it because, you know, I paint, and I mean that is not a very good painting, but it was just wanting to paint really big, and it's an image of Mont Blanc from Argentière, but I just like that light and feeling of being totally immersed in a landscape. But with lockdown, I couldn't go to the mountains anymore for a while. So I began some work based on the west coast of Scotland and the Outer Hebrides and Cape Wrath. I'd made some watercolours there in 2019, and I'd been trying to develop some work that wasn't the normal thing that you find all over the Hebrides, but not really getting anywhere that I was satisfied with anyway. So I was getting to a point where I was thinking, I've got to do something different here, and I thought I'm going to just do some sample colours. And I ended up with this sheet which was about the different oil colours and the mixtures of them. And I just thought something about the west coast in that, you know, the light and the land. And so I began to try and take some of that idea into more abstract work. And the first one that I made, which that inspired, was the small one there. And you can see quite well the relationship between the two. And it was really good fun. And you can get some really nice textures and colour combinations working. And I'd also used a technique of taping to get the horizontal lines and to separate the colours. And basically because I'd had a shoulder operation, so I needed to get a bit of control back. So I worked through different variations. I did that one, and then I thought I'll work a bit bigger, and I thought, I'll just get something that isn't horizontal in with it. So that was the first, you know, try to bring some variation in. And it's sort of, you know, the idea of the headland, and maybe it's a sunset or maybe not. The textures of the mud flats that you get on the Hebrides. And then the next one developed a little bit more in that direction. Until the last one, when I wanted to get something a lot less in your face, as it were, a lot more subtle. And that took a very long time to complete because there were so many, they're not layers, but strata, that's it, good word. And thin, so a lot of waiting for things to dry, a lot of taping over things that had dried enough to develop the whole image. And I think that's probably my favourite one up to now. But the time it was taking, I thought I'll have to try and maybe use watercolour instead, because that would make the technique a lot faster. So I began to develop these pieces of watercolour. I've actually only got 2 here at the moment because the others are out in an exhibition. But you can see from here that what I actually did was I taped the surface first. Okay. Right, so this is how the images start. This is a smaller version with a series of taped lines so that I can think about here I would get more idea of the sparkling on the water because there'd be more light coming through, and then just trying to suggest the headlands and patches of water that, you know, come in between these headlands. So once I've taped up a piece of paper like that, I then just paint the image as if the lines weren't there, apart from occasionally just thinking I'll put some colour that might end up as representing a headland. So I just work on that, leave it to dry, and then take all the tape off once it's dried, and then use different colours found in the image as a whole to start to link the foreground and the distance, so that bits of the blues to try and suggest that it's, you know, a bit of water left on the beach or where you're standing, maybe some darker sand, just hinting. Here some of them almost disappear, and then when you get the lines of white sort of against the texture of the watercolour paper, it just gives you these lovely atmospheric effects that, again, you've got to just go with it, basically, and maybe you spoil it or maybe you don't. And I did several, I think I've got about 8 large ones, and I did 1 or 2 smaller ones, although I do like working large. And that was just another variation with different colour combinations. So I've tried to get different moods with the different images. I think this one's got a subtitle, Halcyon, because it just feels very calm and soothing and gentle. So basically from those to there, and finally to this work. And I think I will take it a little bit further, but I'm not sure where it's going yet. So.
I'm Gerard van der Veen. I'm Dutch. I'm living here in West Woodburn already for 23 years. As you can see, the surroundings. It is a beautiful spot, and I lost my heart more or less here. I am, I shall say, quite a self-taught person. I came from the corporate industry. I did a few technical studies, so yes, I even went to university, etc. But I spent my time in corporate industry around, say, 12 years, etc. And then I went to also even academia, university. I've been always interested in how people create new things. Even when I was a young boy, I even wanted to already make small things. I made things out of wood, trying to look amazed that something could float. Then you make it heavier, it can sink. And how does it work in between? Because I want to make a submarine. So I made, even as a young boy, already a submarine which can float in between. Wearing your swim trousers, you went with your submarine into a pond in the Netherlands. So creativity is for me very important. It's an expression of yourself. Also this constant urge that you can't find what you really want to have. You know, you can go to toy shops. That is one of my favorite things. I never forget to play. I always want to play. But sometimes you go to a toy shop and you just can't find what you were looking for. And then you look in your own wooded shed and then you find something. You say, if I do this. One of my favorite movies is Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. This is exactly how that man was dreaming up his own most beautiful, best car. And this is the same with me. You know, I always wanted to create my own environment. And lucky, if you do it in a corporate setting, your boss will tell you more or less what the targets are. And as long as you do that, everything's fine. Sometimes it's a little difficult if you use unusual procedures, but as long as you stay within your target, no problem. And that also happened more or less how I came to the north of England. One day I landed a video on my desk, and from my boss I was told, Jared, have a look, they say they have some knowledge there. So I went there, I went to England. And there was some knowledge, not that very much, but I saw an avenue how to create that knowledge. So I wrote a proposal that I could stay for 20% of my time here in England. And I did a huge project to look how the interaction with products. And from there on, I stayed more and more here in England. First I was looking for a summer cottage to stay here. But in looking what kind of houses there were here, there wasn't that very much. But then I saw this house, fell in love in the spot, and more or less sold the project to my wife. I said, you know, I want to stay here for 5 years. We'll see what happens, you know. And 5 years went 23 years, and we still love it. In the meantime, I set up Slater Nature. What happened was that we bought this dilapidated old cottage in this area where the rain was even coming inside rather than outside, and in a nutshell, I was restoring that whole house. I'm still restoring it because that is a little bit the disadvantage of a genuine nice old house. It never ends. But it also, the benefit is it keeps you young and agile. So I still enjoy doing it. Do it also in the old-fashioned ways. What happened was I even had to re-roof the house. And during that re-roofing, I came across slate. And this was the first time I was working really with slate. Because in the Netherlands we have tiles, and it is only governmental or special buildings have slate. So I'm not really accustomed with slate, but slate is a quirky material, and I loved working with it. It's on one way very unpredictable. You know, you can spend hours on it and suddenly it breaks in all directions and you think, I have to start over again. Doesn't matter, you learn from that. And I like to challenge the material because I like to make constructions out of it, where the gross majority of people are using slate are making it only for coasters or as a plant tag. Ironically, that was one of my first products, making a tag, because the birds or the wind, they were, as they called, thieving your labels. And therefore, with it as a Christmas present, I gave a few constructed labels made from slate to my wife. Looking at the gigantic pile of redundant slate, because when you re-roof a house, about a quarter you can abandon. It's either cracked or wrong shape or whatever. So, but you have a huge pile of redundant slate, and out of that redundant slate I make my products. This is also the reason why I go to slate merchants and ask kindly permission to go through their slate, but not only to their, how shall I say, to be sold slate, but also their skips. I'm a genuine skip hunter. I still believe that in the average skip in the UK, doesn't matter where, there will be at least £100 worth material in it. You know, it's amazing how much money you can find in skips. This is also even the case with slate merchants. There is so much slate they can't really resell, and whether they have to skip it, they have to pay removal rates, and I barter as a genuine Dutchman selling slate to the Welsh. But I don't pay for my slate. I get it from skips and I construct it from there. I make at the moment around 80, 90, almost 100 different products out of it. It's endless. Slate is such a versatile material that I have another 100 products in my mind which you could make. It's almost endless. It's a beautiful material, and I can only invite you to show the studio or the workshop where I make it. Welcome to my small workshop. This is my first shed. This is where it all started. As you can see, I have a small sign there, Say Nature. That's where it all started. And this is a small dedicated shed where I made my main tool. It's a diamond cutter where I cut everything, because you have to cut everything with water and you have to protect yourself. So you have to wear all kinds of protectors that you don't inhale the dust, that you don't get the dust into your eyes or in your ears, whatever. So you really have to wear all kinds of protection, and that's where the whole process starts, here. And from here I make all kinds of sub products, and this is what you call the dirty room, and you have to grind it before you glue it, etc. Welcome. So this is now you're coming into my studio. I built the studio myself. It's also made from a lot of reclaimed materials. All the stonework you can see is made from reclaimed stonework. I had a river retaining wall here, and I found a lot of stones in there which I could reuse. I made literally all the cornerstones you can imagine. The woodwork is coming from I think 5 or 6 trees from Cap Heaton. I bought a few trees there. They were milled in Langley. No, they were milled in Brampton by somebody who appointed me from Langley. And then what you get is the undressed wood was landing in my garden, and then I had to process it, and I made all these constructions myself. There are no really technical drawings. I made it more or less the way how I would like to have it. Sometimes for some corners which I found a little bit complex, I just made a doodle to find out how I would construct it. Being an engineer, I more or less knew what I was doing, but it was the first time I was doing in wood. Basically the only tools I bought was a router and 2 chisels, a mortar chisel and a plane chisel. And then it's just a matter of sculpting. The whole frame is pegged also with oaks. Oak pegs. I was fortunate that the guild in England, I wrote them a letter that I read a book about timber framed houses, and I found their pegs a little bit large, so I had a small question to them, can I use smaller pegs? And to make a long story short, they made 113 pegs for me to be used, and I drilled them together with a friend of mine, and so that's the nice thing. It's a completely self-contained construction. In this studio, I was fortunate. I was awarded a grant from Europe, a development grant, and that helped me in building this. They support me from the first day. Talking about Slate in Nature, I make my products here. This is the clean room. We just visited the workshop where was the dirty room, and even before it's even dirtier, because when you take it out of the skip, there are even insects on it, and the moss has been lying for around 100 years on a roof. You can imagine that it becomes quite dirty. But then you clean it, you process it, and then it comes as part here, and this is more or less a luxurious assembly room where all the parts are coming together. And I make all kinds of products for in and around the house, in the garden. I make plant pots, I make bird feeders. The story about the bird feeder is my most popular product. It sits by a sucker on the window, like here. I don't know if you can see it. You see here, with a sucker on the window, and you can see the birds that are coming from close range. Maybe during we're filming, we can see a bird, but it is middle of the day, then they are a little bit quiet. It's more in the early mornings when they see me in my pajama filling them, they come. I make all kinds of products, from feeders to bird havers. I make some tables. If I find an odd piece of wood, I make with it all kinds of table leaves on it. You can have in a shape of a leaf as a top, or as in the shape of a heart. I make hanging bird tables, standing bird tables. These are my pots. It's a modular system, so they even fit into each other, so you can make your own feature. If you want to make construction, you can make just a 3-tier system. They also fit into each other horizontally, so you can also make a horizontal feature, just how you like doing it. Sometimes if you have a left and a right one, you can start all over again. It's a modular system. And for Christmas time I make wreaths, I make plant pots, and vases, triple vases. What I sometimes do is you can even personalize, because I also do engraving, and like a vase like that, I call it a wedding vase, because what happens is that I sometimes give the customer 10 pieces of paper, and then the customers or the friends can doodle or put the names on it, and children make drawings on it, and then I can template it on the vase, so it becomes a genuine time document. Or you can even would have a business logo on it. You know, this is just a coaster for a company.
So can people come up with their own ideas, Gerard, and
yes.
Ask you to create something using slate?
Yes, they can. I am always in for new things. So if you have any idea you would like to realize in slate, I'm always into a challenge. You just come along.
And people can come to the studio here in West Woodburn and see particular pieces which perhaps might inspire them.
Yes.
Or come with an idea, perhaps a drawing.
Yeah, they can. It's would it. We always say, because you're quite likely, we live rural, you have to do some effort to come to us. I always advise you come have either with a drink at the patio here in the rear. You can have a drink, a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, or we can sit here inside, doesn't matter, depending on the weather. We have an open door policy, and if you have a nice idea, by all means. It's I'd like to help you out.
And where can people find you on the internet, Jared?
I have an own website. It's called slateandnature.com. It's a more picture-related website, so that you have to give it a little bit of time for downloading it. It's already quite long in existence, but it has beautiful photographs from all my products in it. So you can consult there. And I quite often say also have a look at that, because then you have an idea what we can achieve. But yes, if you have an idea, you can also, our contact address is there. Another thing, we are open all seasons with it, and every hour. We live next door, so basically if you just phone us, you can always come. I don't follow normal shopping hours, so don't worry. This is a holiday place, so we don't mind to receive you at any time.
Jared, thank you very much for talking to Hexhamtv.
You're welcome.
I'm Jane Veach, and I'm an artist living in Newbrough on the South Tyne, a village on the South Tyne.
Jane, how did you become an artist?
I was always interested. My parents were interested. They met in a life class, and I actually did a degree in history of art at Edinburgh, which was chiefly because I went to a school in Somerset so small that they'd never put anyone through A-level art before, so there wasn't a sort of confidence building process for making a portfolio and applying for art college. Although in fact I loved doing history of art at Edinburgh, and it was a good basis. And later on, after I'd had my children, I studied fine art with the Open College of the Arts at Newcastle, and have gone on from there.
What sort of aspects of art particularly interest you?
Well, I draw and paint, and I actually, when I started, thought I would be most interested in people, but in fact I've developed a very strong interest in landscape. Well, in natural things, in the natural world. It's not sort of making scenes so much as thinking about being part of and completely connected with the natural world, and that's what motivates me really. So place is very important, and getting to know places. So I have two special places in particular, and one is the South Tyne here at Newbrough, particularly the sort of the bank I walk along nearly every day, and the other is a bit more in certain places on the west coast of Scotland and the islands off the west coast of Scotland. So and that's, both those things are big parts of my working life.
And are there particular artists who you would say influence your work?
Yes, I
Well, the first artist I ever remember noticing, the first was Yvonne Hitchens, who my parents used to take us to the Fitzwilliam in Cambridge, and there's a postcard of the painting, the boathouse, just behind you, and it's very painterly. It's all about paint, but it's also utterly about a place. It's not what you would call descriptive, but it is essentially about somewhere, and it's about paint, and that sort of thing has influenced me a lot. And it's other artists like that, Joan Erdley, William Gillies, Peter Lanyon, a Cornish painter, and others. But they tend to be from early 20th century onwards, and they tend to be not descriptive, but not abstract, but using abstract ideas. Yes.
And how do you go about creating your work?
I like to get to know somewhere, and that is often done, especially on the West Coast. I'll make expeditions in order to collect ideas, so I'll take sketchbooks and paint pastels, and drawing materials, and go out and make a lot of sketches, which are for me basically they can be as messy as necessary. It's often the middle of winter. It's often quite wild. It's just a process, and very occasionally one sort of creams off the top, and I think, oh, I could frame that, but that's not really how it is. And then I'll bring them back. I'll probably pin them up, and I'll live with them for quite a long time. It takes me a while to absorb things. So having come back with that lot, I'll probably actually be working on something else while those are on the back burner, and then I'll come round to making work from what I've been doing from those sketches. And that later work is usually in oil. Sometimes it's mixed media, dry and wet mediums, and I have used collage a lot and I used it in teaching as well, because it's a very interesting way of taking a step back from description and having to think in a different way about how you see, and thinking this could make me think that. So that's interesting.
And do you concentrate on large-scale pieces, or do you concentrate on sort of very focused areas when you're going to paint or sketch? I
haven't made enormous works. I have sometimes made a series, so that takes up a lot of room. But I don't know if what you mean is I tend to focus in, however large or small I make the work. I tend to focus in and be aware of the texture and atmosphere all around, rather than looking out to a huge scene. Even if I'm looking at a mountain, I'm probably quite close to it and looking up at it, and feeling its whole presence, rather than seeing it in a huge landscape. Because it's about being there. It's about being in, rather than being an outsider looking out across.
What do other artists or other people that you've worked with say about your style?
They think it's quite strong. They actually think that it's very recognisable, although I have trouble when I'm trying to put work out, if I just can only show some photos or whatever, in making people see it as a coherent thing. And I think it's because I don't really produce a product, I produce pieces of work. And although it is coherent, really, basically overall, it sometimes is difficult to persuade a gallery that that's the case. Yes, I think I know my classes tended to think that it was quite strong and quite brave sort of work. So when I first started making collage, they were made from torn, found papers, you know, torn up magazines and that sort of thing. But later, I moved on to preparing papers. So you can see that there are all sorts of strong pastel and charcoal type marks on these papers, and then tearing them up, cutting them up, and putting them together along with paint and with pastel. And the advantage of that is that you can have the big wild strong marks which convey rock, weather, and the sort of remote wildness of the place, but then you can use those as your medium and turn it to something else. And this is a place on the island of Muck called, which they call Witch's Cauldron, and somewhere I went back to again and again, and have made a lot of work about in different ways. So this is a known place which means a lot to me. So this is another collage from Muck called Beyond the Bothy, and illustrates one of the reasons that I really like this sort of collage. The papers are strong enough to, they don't need to be stuck down, and you can mount them proud of the background, so that they cast a shadow. They're an object in their own right, and take on a stronger meaning because of that, I think. Well, this painting is called Hebridean Morning, and comes from, I made it from a small sketch, pastel sketch that I did on an August morning on Muck, and but that sketch really just triggered memory, and I positively use memory a lot when I'm working, and try to have ways so that I've got something that triggers me, and then I'm not trying to slavishly copy anything. I'm creating something. So this is a very gestural oil painting about the feeling of a morning in the Hebrides. Right, this painting is called Tormore Headland, and is from sketches done on the Isle of Skye in late October, November. I had an exhibition at Isle Ornsay on Skye, and I needed to make quite a lot of work for it, and this was one of them. And I like the way that I've used a dark ground, so the whole feeling of it is of brightness coming out of darkness, which was one of the things about that time of year on Skye. It was quite dull a lot of the time, but there was a lot of colour. So this is on the Slate Peninsula, looking across to Knoydart. And again, it's very gestural and quite a lot of drawing. So these are 3 triptychs which I made during lockdown, and are basically about the daily walk, walking along the river, beside the river every day, in different states of mind and weather and so on. And they started with little drawings in a very small notebook, little scrappy pencil drawings. Yeah, those are actually different ones. And then I played with those and made a lot of much simpler sketches about organising those ideas and the types of marks and so on. So you see, can you see those well enough? And you can see how those have developed into these. And these are painted on, there's a acrylic ground on board, and in the acrylic there's sand. So they've got a rough surface which holds the paint very well and makes the fact that they're quite simple as far as the subject matter, it keeps the surface interesting. So that's how those were made. I've just come back from a week sketching with 2 other artists on the island of Mull, somewhere I've been before, and so it was actually it was nice weather, but the cloud was down all the time, so it was quite still and dull and hard to get going at first, but I managed it. So this was getting going with the sort of marks about rocks, wet sand, the colours of a beach, the colours of a pale skied day, and the marks helping to show the involvement, that my involvement with the place. That's actually from a different time. So this is more of the same day, looking out towards Staffa and the Treshnish Islands. And this was a day when we took a boat out to Lunga, which is one of the islands of the Treshnish, which is amazing at this time of year for birds. So cliffs full of guillemots and gannets and so on, which is what my fellow artist was interested in, but it was the place that was more of interest to me. Actually, I've got another longer one in this. I actually carried my big sketchbook with me on that day, so big gullies, which are always a thing that interests me, with the Dutchman's cap in the background. and then trying to simplify what I was seeing, and as the sun was getting lower, it was sort of, the brightness of the light was draining all the colour out of everything, so that was quite interesting. So it was just a strong shape. And then this was another day, quite late on in the day, we'd walked out to a different point. Back to a rocky beach. And then over to the island of Ulva and Crackegg on the far side. So that's the sort of thing I would bring back from these places, and using watercolour, drawing with charcoal or compressed charcoal, and I find a pale pastel quite useful for adding some atmosphere and putting in a bit of distance.
Great.
Thanks for watching. You can also see and buy the artist's work by visiting www.shopnorthumberland.com. If you are a Northumberland-based artist, creative or producer who would like to be featured in a Shop Northumberland live stream, please email hello@shopnorthumberland.com.